The silence in my studio was a living thing, heavy and constant, a shroud woven from dust motes and the absence of sound. It had been like this for 3 years, ever since the fire. Every morning I woke to the same gray light filtering through the high windows, illuminating the untouched drafting table, the rows of scaled models gathering a fine layer of neglect. My hands, once precise and restless, felt leaden. My mind, a labyrinth of angles and stresses, now only mapped the contours of a single, devastating event. I moved through the days like a ghost in my own life. Coffee, black and bitter, was my only ritual. The news on the old radio was a distant hum, meaningless chatter against the roar that still echoed in my ears. I saw no one, spoke to no one. The city outside my door was a blur of noise and activity I no longer belonged to. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the dark glass of the window, a gaunt face, eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and remembered every detail. Guilt was a taste in my mouth, metallic and persistent. It was my design, I see, every beam, every joist, every window placed with meticulous care. A home, I called it, a sanctuary, and it became a tomb, my family gone. The smoke still clung to my clothes and my memory, an invisible stain I could never wash away. I had built it to last, to protect. Instead, I had built a pyre. The irony was a fresh stab each dawn. One Tuesday, the routine fractured. A crisp envelope, far too formal for my current existence, lay on the worn doormat. It bore the insignia of a solicitor's firm I didn't recognize. My name, Raj, was typed with an impersonal precision that felt almost accusatory. My hands trembled slightly as I tore it open. The letter was brief, to the point. An inheritance. My great-aunt, a woman I barely remembered, had passed. He had bequeathed to me her estate, an ancestral home nestled deep in the countryside, miles from anywhere I knew. The address felt alien on the page, a string of forgotten names and numbers. The solicitor's words were polite, professional, urging my immediate attention to the property. An ancestral home. The phrase itself felt like a relic from another era. My family had always been urban, modern. The thought of a sprawling old house filled me with a strange mix of apprehension and a flicker of something almost like curiosity, a sensation I hadn't felt in years. Perhaps it was the sheer audacity of the offer, the unexpected disruption to my carefully constructed wall of grief. A new place, a place where the air might not be thick with the ghosts of my past mistakes. A fresh start. I packed a single bag. It took me less than an hour. There wasn't much left of my old life to take, and even less of my current one I wanted to keep. The drive was long, the landscape gradually shedding the grime of the city for the muted greens and browns of autumn fields. The house sat at the end of a long, overgrown lane, shrouded by ancient skeletal trees. It was larger than I had imagined, a hulking silhouette against the bruised sky. The roof sagged in places, a patchwork of missing slates. A rusted iron gate hung half open, groaning a welcome as I pushed it aside. Stepping onto the porch, the floorboards groaned under my weight. The front door, a heavy slab of oak, was warped and scarred. The lock, when I finally managed to turn the key the solicitor had provided, shrieked in protest. My flashlight beam cut through it, revealing a cavernous hall draped in cobwebs like tattered lace. Dust motes danced in the light, disturbed by my hesitant breath. I moved from room to room, each one a tableau of forgotten lives. Heavy, dust-sheeted furniture loomed like silent sentinels. It felt as if the house itself was holding its breath. The floorboards creaked underfoot, not just from my weight, but with a faint, almost imperceptible groan that seemed to come from deeper within the house beneath me. I found the study on the ground floor, a room crammed with forgotten books and papers. A large, ornate desk dominated the space, its surface covered in a thick layer of dust. I ran my hand over it, disturbing decades of settled quiet. Among the scattered documents beneath a stack of brittle ledgers, I found a roll of architectural plans, yellowed and faded. They weren't official documents. The paper was thicker, the hand-drawn lines more personal. Intrigued, I unrolled them carefully. They were blueprints of this very house, but not as it stood now. They showed an earlier iteration, a grander design, and then, scrawled in a frantic hand in the margins, modifications, additions, deletions. My great-aunt, I mused, must have had an interest in the building's history or perhaps its secrets. As I traced the lines, my architect's eyes searching for discrepancies, a particular detail snagged my attention. A section, carefully cross-hatched and labeled, showed a space beneath the main foundation. My breath hitched. The label, written in a cramped, precise script, read, "Basement level officially doesn't exist." What did that even mean? And why would someone draw plans for a part of the house that wasn't supposed to be there? My heart began to accelerate, a dull thrum against my ribs. The house, which had felt merely old and neglected moments ago, now seemed to press in on me, its secrets suddenly palpable. What kind of secret needed to be officially erased from existence, and what did it hold? The house, which had felt merely old and neglected moments ago, now, it felt like a presence. A vast, silent watcher. I clutched the rolled-up architectural plans tighter, the brittle paper crinkling under my grip. The discrepancy, the phantom basement level, officially doesn't exist, had burrowed into my thoughts, a sliver of ice in the warmth I'd hoped to find here. I spent the next week in a determined haze of activity. Unpacking boxes, wiping down dusty surfaces, sweeping cobwebs from corners that seemed to gather them even as I worked. Each task was a deliberate act of reclaiming, an attempt to infuse the old stone and timber with my own life, my own presence. I wanted to overwrite the lingering scent of disuse with the smell of fresh wood polish and the subtle spice of my tea. My goal was to make this ancestral home, this silent monument to my family's past, a sanctuary, a place where the memories of the fire, the acrid smoke, and the hollow ache of absence wouldn't claw at me quite so fiercely. The first few days were mostly uneventful, aside from the usual creaks and groans of an ancient structure settling. The wind whistled through ill-fitting window frames, creating eerie, mournful sounds that I rationalized as mere physics. The floorboards groaned under my weight, each step a conversation with the house itself. I told myself it was just an old house, asserting its age. Then came the cold. I'd walk into the library, intent on arranging the countless leather-bound books, and a specific corner near the grand, unused fireplace would drop several degrees. My breath wouldn't fog, but a prickle would run across my arms, raising gooseflesh. I'd pause, listening, but there was never anything. Only the dull roar of the wind outside or the distant caw of a crow. I started leaving doors open just to see if they'd close on their own. They didn't. I'd snap it shut again, blaming a faulty latch. The tremors of the old house. My determination remained, a stubborn shield against the creeping unease. I was Raj. I was an architect. I dealt with structures, with logic, not this. One evening, as twilight bled through the tall, grimy windows, painting the grand hall in shades of bruised purple, I heard it. A faint scraping sound originating from somewhere below me. It wasn't a mouse or a tree branch against the roof. It was a deliberate, rhythmic drag, like something heavy being pulled across a stone floor. I froze, a spoon halfway to my mouth, the lukewarm soup suddenly tasting like ash. The sound continued, slow and methodical, reverberating up through the floorboards. My throat tightened. I pressed my ear against the polished wood of the dining room table, trying to pinpoint its source. It seemed to come from directly beneath me, from a place that, according to the official plans, shouldn't exist. The scraping had stopped. My initial thought was to dismiss it. The old pipes, the settling foundation. But the memory of the anomalous plans, the stark lines marking a basement level, officially doesn't exist, gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the image of those meticulous drawings, so precise, so real, depicting something that was supposedly impossible. Driven by a restless need to understand, I grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight and the rolled plans. My footsteps, usually confident, now felt tentative, each one a question mark. I descended into the existing cellar, a damp, musty space used for storage, its walls lined with shelves of forgotten jars and brittle boxes. The air here was heavy, smelling of mildew and stagnant earth. I walked slowly, shining the beam across the rough-hewn stone walls, searching for any anomaly, any indication. The plans showed the basement level, officially doesn't exist, extending directly beneath the dining room. I moved to that section of the cellar, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The wall here felt different. The stone was rougher, less uniform than the rest of the cellar's foundation. As I ran my hand over it, I felt a faint seam, almost imperceptible, hidden beneath a thick layer of grime and something that felt like dried plaster, like old iron or something else. It wasn't mortar. It was a joint, a deliberate cut in the stone. My breath hitched. This wasn't a natural formation. This was constructed. With growing urgency, I cleared away more of the debris, revealing a rectangular outline, a hidden door disguised as part of the wall. It was flush, almost perfectly camouflaged. My fingers trembled as I traced the edge of what felt like a heavy stone slab. There had to be a way to open it. I pressed along the edges, feeling for a latch, a handle, anything. Nothing. My gaze dropped to the floor directly in front of the hidden entrance. The flagstones here were slightly raised, and one of them, tucked almost against the wall, seemed to have a faint indentation on its surface. A shallow, circular groove. I pushed on it, then twisted. With a deep, groaning thunk that resonated through the very ground beneath my feet, the hidden stone door began to move inward, grinding slowly on unseen hinges. What exactly lay beyond that threshold? In the basement level officially doesn't exist. The discrepancy, the phantom basement level officially doesn't exist, had burrowed into my thoughts, a persistent splinter. I told myself it was just a mistake, a clerical error from decades past, perhaps a forgotten annex demolished before it was ever properly documented. The logical part of my mind, the part that dealt in concrete, in steel and glass, demanded a sensible explanation. I unrolled the plans on the vast, dust-filmed dining table, smoothing the brittle sheets with an almost desperate care. The light from the single, bare bulb above cast long, dancing shadows, making the empty room feel even larger, more cavernous. I traced the lines of the foundation, the cross-sections of the walls. Nothing. No sign of any subterranean level beyond the shallow crawl space detailed in the later revisions. Yet the original survey, dated 1888, clearly indicated a subgrade utility access and a subsequent amendment scribbled in faded sepia ink that simply stated, BL001 removed. Removed, not demolished, not filled in. Removed. How did I remove a level? A faint, sweet scent drifted through the air, cloying and heavy, like dried petals left too long in a forgotten drawer, but with an unsettling, almost metallic undertone. I inhaled deeply, trying to place it. Old house. I reasoned, decaying potpourri from a previous owner, perhaps. The scent seemed to shift, following the currents of the stale air. I got up, walked to the nearest window, and pushed it open, letting in a gust of cool evening air. The smell dissipated, or so I thought. Back at the table, I leaned closer to the plans, my eyes scanning for any other anomalies. That's when I heard it. A soft, rhythmic tap-tap-tap. It sounded like a small creature, perhaps a mouse, scratching at the plaster somewhere in the walls. I paused, listening. It seemed to come from the far end of the room near the old, sealed fireplace. I walked towards it, my footsteps echoing on the bare floorboards. The tapping stopped. I waited, holding my breath. I shrugged, convincing myself it was just the house settling or the wind playing tricks with loose shingles outside. Old houses groan, they creak, they make sounds. It was natural. I returned to the plans, frustrated by the lack of definitive answers. The more I stared at the blank space where the basement level officially doesn't exist should have been, the more that metallic, sweet smell returned, stronger this time, almost pressing in on me. It was no longer a vague hint. It was distinct, like old copper and something else. Something sickly sweet, like overripe fruit left to rot. My stomach churned. This wasn't just old house smell. I focused again on the original survey, blowing away a layer of fine dust. My finger brushed against a section of the oldest blueprint layer, where the paper felt strangely rough, almost abraded. I peered closer. Beneath the faded ink of the original foundation outline, very faint, as if etched into the paper itself before the ink was applied, was a small, crudely drawn symbol. It looked like a broken circle with 3 radiating lines. It wasn't an architectural symbol I recognized. It was almost tribal or arcane. A chill snaked up my spine, not from the open window, but from something deeper. The tap-tap-tap started again, this time undeniably closer, right behind the wall next to me. It wasn't a mouse. It was too deliberate, too rhythmic, like fingers. Small, bony fingers, slowly, methodically, scraping against the plaster. My skin prickled. I spun around, my heart giving a sudden, violent lurch against my ribs. The sound stopped instantly. The room was silent again, save for the distant hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen. I stood there, frozen, listening to the frantic beat of my own pulse in my ears. The air grew heavy, thick with that cloying sweetness. My breath hitched. I could almost taste it, a metallic tang on my tongue. My eyes darted around the vast, empty room. Was I truly alone? I forced myself to move, to dismiss it. Fatigue, I told myself. Grief playing tricks, the isolation. It was all getting to me. I needed to sleep. I needed a clear head. I rolled up the plans, the mysterious symbol still burning in my mind's eye. It was a tooth, not human, too small, too pointed. A child's tooth, perhaps, or a small animal's. It was old, discolored, and felt oddly warm to the touch. It had been tucked deep within the folds of the 1888 blueprint, right where the basement level, officially doesn't exist, would have been. I stared at the tooth, then at the blank space on the plans. My hands trembled. The sweet metallic smell was overwhelming now, choking me. I could hear it again, the faint, deliberate tap-tap-tap, not from the walls this time, but from beneath the floorboards directly below my feet. What had I found? And what was trying to reach me from below? I peered closer. Beneath the faded ink of the original foundation outline, very faint, as if etched into the paper itself, was a series of lines. They weren't drawn with ink, not like the other marks. These were impressions, almost like someone had pressed a stylus too hard, creating a ghost image. My finger traced the almost imperceptible grooves. They outlined a space, a roughly rectangular void, directly beneath what the main blueprint designated as the primary living area. A space that did not appear on any of the official plans, not even the oldest ones. My breath hitched. This wasn't an abrasion. This was deliberate. Someone had gone to great lengths to erase or obscure this detail, yet the physical pressure of the etching remained, a phantom limb on the architectural skeleton. I knew with the certainty of an architect who had spent decades dissecting structures that this indicated a basement level officially doesn't exist. The phrase formed in my mind like a cold stone. A shiver, not from the drafty room, traced its way down my spine. My mind, usually a fortress of logic and calculation, suddenly felt permeable, exposed to something beyond its usual parameters. I shook my head, trying to dislodge the creeping unease. There had to be a logical explanation. A forgotten extension, a previous owner's folly never completed, an error in surveying. My hands, steady despite the tremor in my chest, reached for a magnifying glass from my kit. Under magnification, the etched lines gained a sharper, more defined presence. They depicted walls, thick and irregular, and a single narrow passage leading off into what would be the foundation's deepest point. No windows, no doors marked, just a contained subterranean box. I rolled up the blueprints, the paper rustling like dry leaves. My focus sharpened, a determined edge replacing the initial apprehension. I would find this space. I would understand it. This house had secrets, and as its current guardian, I felt an almost primal urge to uncover them, to peel back the layers of dust and neglect, and perhaps in doing so, understand the lingering shadows that clung to its old timbers. My investigation began systematically, as any good architectural survey should. I started in the main hall, tapping walls, listening to the echoes. The house groaned around me, a symphony of settling wood and ancient plumbing. I moved slowly, meticulously, a tape measure extended, comparing actual dimensions to the blueprints. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of aged wood and something else, something metallic and faint like rust. I found the first discrepancy in the main living room. The blueprint showed a solid structural wall, but when I tapped it, the sound was subtly different, a fraction less dense. I ran my hand along the plaster, feeling for seams for any telltale sign of alteration. Nothing obvious, but the difference in resonance bothered me. I pressed my ear to the wall. Faintly, I thought I heard a distant, almost imperceptible hum like a forgotten appliance, or was it just the blood rushing in my ears? I moved into the kitchen, then the dining room, checking every load-bearing wall, every floor joist I could access. My breath plumed faintly in the air. I kept telling myself it was just an old house, drafty, poorly insulated. Intelligent, it seemed to follow me, a silent companion. In the pantry, a small, cramped space tucked beside the kitchen, I noticed a section of the floorboards. They didn't quite match the others. The grain was slightly different, the wear patterns less pronounced. My fingers brushed against the edge, feeling a barely perceptible ridge. I knelt, pulling a small utility knife from my bag. Carefully, I worked the tip into the seam. The wood groaned, protesting. Beneath the newer top layer, I found a rougher, older plank. It was almost perfectly camouflaged, stained to match, but the craftsmanship was crude, unlike the elegant joinery elsewhere in the house. This was a patch job, a cover-up. My heart began to thud, a dull drum against my ribs. I managed to pry up the disguised plank, a space too deep for a simple utility access. The air that wafted up was stale, earthy, and carried that faint, metallic tang I'd noticed earlier, now stronger, more distinct. It smelled like forgotten things, like secrets buried deep. I shone my flashlight into the opening. The beam cut through the absolute blackness, revealing a rough-hewn stone wall, not brick or timber, but raw, uneven stone. It descended vertically into the gloom, disappearing beyond the reach of my light. This was it. This had to be the entrance, or at least an access point to the basement level, officially doesn't exist. It wasn't just a structural anomaly, this was a deliberate concealment. Why? What could be down there that someone went to such lengths to hide? My hand trembled, the flashlight beam wavering. The faint etched lines on the drawing paper seemed to hum with an unheard frequency, a silent vibration against my fingertips. I traced them again, my brow furrowed, trying to make sense of their delicate impression. They weren't architectural in the conventional sense. No walls, no doorways, no stairs. Just a series of interlocking symbols, almost organic in their flow, winding around the original foundation outline like veins beneath skin. They were too precise to be accidental, too deliberate to be a mere doodle. A chill, thin and sharp, snaked its way up my spine, independent of the cool air in the study. The lamp on the desk flickered once, casting the room into a brief, deeper shadow before flaring back to life. My breath hitched. I leaned closer to the old blueprint. The scent of aged paper and something else, something faintly metallic, like old blood or rust, filling my nostrils. The symbols didn't make sense, not at first. My architect's mind craved logic, structure, purpose. But these lines defied all known principles of design. They reminded me of something ancient, something primal. A net, a trap, or perhaps a conduit. I pulled out the other documents I'd found, scattering them across the desk. The journal entries from the previous owner, the cryptic notes from the construction foreman, the faded photographs of the house in various states of disrepair. I looked for any correlation, any hint. The foreman's notes in particular mentioned unforeseen structural challenges and anomalous subterranean shifts, phrases that now seemed less like excuses and more like veiled warnings. He had drawn crude sketches of cracks appearing in foundations, not on the main house, but in an area labeled sub-level access point. Sub-level access point. My mind latched onto it. The lines on the blueprint, I realized with a sickening lurch, weren't part of the foundation. They were under it. They seemed to map out a hidden network, a subterranean labyrinth that twisted beneath the entire property, converging precisely where I'd discovered that impossible space. My hand trembled as I picked up one of the previous owner's journals. His scrawled handwriting, once a mere curiosity, now pulsed with a new, horrifying significance. He wrote of the creeping sorrow, of the weight of memory, and how the house breathes with my despair. I dismissed it as poetic madness, the ramblings of a man consumed by his own grief. But what if it wasn't? What if he was describing something literal, the way my guilt over the fire, over my family, had festered here, refusing to heal? I had thought it was just the atmosphere, my own psychological state. Now a more sinister possibility clawed its way into my mind. The etched lines, the hidden basement, the pervasive grief. They started to coalesce into a horrifying mosaic. These weren't just architectural anomalies, they were a system. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence. I could almost feel eyes on me, ancient and hungry. The journal entry from the previous owner, dated weeks before his disappearance, screamed at me from the page. It feeds, it grows stronger with every tear, every regret. My son, my wife, their absence is its feast. I cannot leave, it binds me with their sorrow. This house, it is a stomach. My breath caught in my throat, a stomach. The reveal hit me then, a punch to the gut that left me gasping. The etched lines, the basement level officially doesn't exist. The suffering of every occupant before me, it wasn't just a haunted house. It was a mechanism, a living, breathing trap. The lines were channels, conduits designed to draw in and concentrate the potent energy of human despair, grief, and guilt. The house wasn't just a place where tragedy happened. It cultivated it. It fed on it. And I, Raj, with my crushing burden of guilt, my profound grief for my lost family, was its latest, most abundant harvest. I was a prime target, a walking buffet of sorrow. The house hadn't merely inherited me, it had lured me. It had drawn me in with the promise of solace, only to consume my pain. My hands flew to my face, pressing against my temples as if to hold my skull together. The temperature in the room plummeted. I could see my own breath, a wispy cloud in the sudden Arctic air. A low, guttural growl vibrated through the floorboards, a sound too deep to be natural, too close to be dismissed. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from below. From the basement level officially doesn't exist. The lines on the drawing began to glow faintly in my mind's eye, not with light, but with a terrible, malevolent energy. They were a map of its digestive system. My family, my beautiful family. Had their tragic end been merely a prelude? Had the fire, the one I designed, the one that broke me, been a deliberate act or a consequence of this house's insatiable hunger? And if it fed on grief and guilt, what would happen when it had consumed all of mine? What would be left? The drawing, a grotesque blueprint of something that had devoured my own flesh and blood, pulsed behind my eyelids. My family, my beautiful, trusting family, the fire, my design. It wasn't just a house I'd built, it was a trap. A carefully laid, architecturally sound trap. And I, the architect, had walked right into the heart of it. The thought coiled in my gut, a freezing snake. I had to get out, now. My hands trembled, fumbling for the heavy iron key on the hall table. The brass was cold, slick with a fine film of dust. Each breath felt like a shard of glass in my lungs. My pulse hammered against my ribs, an erratic drumbeat of pure panic. I stumbled towards the massive oak front door, the very portal I had passed through countless times since arriving, each time feeling a strange, unsettling pull, never realizing it was the tightening of a noose. Doorknob turned easily, almost too easily, under my clammy grip. A sigh of relief, thin and reedy, escaped my lips. Freedom, it was within reach. I pulled. The door didn't budge. I pulled again harder, bracing my foot against the polished floorboards. Nothing. It felt as if it had been cemented shut, or as if some invisible, colossal weight pressed against it from the other side. My fingers slipped on the smooth wood, scraping against the rough grain of the doorframe. No, not stuck. It felt solid, immovable. A cold dread began to seep into my bones, replacing the initial surge of adrenaline. I pushed shoulder first with all my strength. The old wood groaned in protest, but the door remained stubbornly sealed. My breath hitched. This wasn't right. I had opened it just this morning. The air in the hall grew heavy, thick, and still, as if the very atmosphere was pressing down on me. I spun around, desperate, my eyes darting from window to window. The tall, arched windows that overlooked the overgrown garden, they offered another way out. I raced to the nearest one, a desperate hope flickering. The latch was stiff, rusted in place. I yanked, gritting my teeth, my grip tight. It wouldn't budge. I tried another and another. Each one was the same, frozen, sealed tighter than a tomb. I could feel the house around me, a presence, not just walls and timbers, but something vast and aware. It was watching. It was enjoying this. My eyes fell on the back door leading to the dilapidated conservatory. Perhaps that was it. A less formal exit, less prone to the house's strange whims. The floorboards creaked under my weight, a symphony of ancient wood, but now it sounded different, more deliberate, as if the house itself were shuffling its feet, blocking my path. The back door. It was locked from the inside, a simple bolt. I slid it back with a loud clack. It turned. Again, nothing. The door was as immovable as the front. A low hum, almost imperceptible, vibrated through the floor beneath my feet. It wasn't a sound I heard with my ears, but one I felt deep in my chest, a resonant thrum that made my teeth ache. I was trapped, truly trapped. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I slammed my fist against the door, a futile gesture that only bruised my knuckles. A faint, mocking creak answered me from somewhere above, as if the rafters were laughing. The house had shifted. I felt it. A subtle rearrangement of its internal organs, closing off every avenue of escape. It felt like a breath, a long, slow exhalation against my skin. My mind raced, scrambling for any possibility. Was there a hidden passage, a secret exit? I thought of the architect's notes, the solicitor's cryptic remarks about the property's strange layout. He had mentioned a section, a basement level, officially doesn't exist. Almost as an afterthought, a curiosity. I dismissed it then, but now, the thought of it sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. It wasn't an exit, it was the heart, the very core of this thing that held me. As if in answer to my thought, the humming intensified, emanating from the floor directly beneath my feet. It wasn't just a vibration anymore. It was a low, guttural thrum that pulsed through the very foundations of the house. The air thickened further, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and sweet like fermenting fruit and old pennies. It felt like the house was drawing a deep, slow breath, pulling me further into its monstrous lungs. My legs felt like lead. My head swam. I could feel the invisible tendrils of the entity reaching for me, not with physical touch, but with an overwhelming sense of presence, a suffocating weight on my chest. It wasn't just preventing my escape. It was asserting its dominion. It wanted me to know, to feel, to understand that I was its. I stumbled back, tripping over a loose floorboard. The world tilted. My vision blurred at the edges. The house wasn't just a structure anymore. It was a living, breathing, malevolent being. And I was inside it. A shudder ran through the entire building, a deep tremor that rattled the remaining panes in the conservatory windows. The glass didn't break, but it groaned, singing a low, mournful tune. What did it want with me? What was this house, this entity, truly capable of? My family, the fire, my design, and I, the architect, I had built it. The realization was a bitter bile in my throat, a poison curdling my insides. Shame, hot and sharp, burned through the cold terror. This wasn't some random haunting. This was personal. This was my fault, again, amplified, twisted into something monstrous. I clutched the tattered architectural plans, the ones the appraiser had left behind, the ones that had shown me the impossibility of the house's true structure. There was a discrepancy, a void where space should have been, a phantom room that defied the visible architecture. It wasn't on any official record, not even the oldest ones I'd found in the study. A basement level officially doesn't exist. The words whispered in my head, a chilling echo of the plans themselves. If my designs could hide a structural flaw, they could also hide a secret I needed to find. My hands, slick with a nervous sweat, traced the lines on the old parchment. The house itself felt like a living thing around me, its old timbers groaning, settling, breathing. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of dust and something else, something metallic and sweet, like old blood mixed with damp earth. It clung to my clothes, to my skin. The attic, the main floor, the second floor, I'd searched them all. It had to be below. I remembered a small, almost imperceptible detail in the original blueprints for the main hall, a barely visible crosshatch near the grand fireplace. It was a common architectural shorthand for a hidden mechanism, something often used in older homes for secret compartments or dumbwaiters. My ancestors, it seemed, had a penchant for secrets. My breath hitched. This house wasn't just old, it was designed to conceal. My fingers scraped along the rough mortar. Erching, the stone was unforgiving, ancient. Then, just above the mantel, hidden by a decorative carving of intertwined vines, I felt it. A small, smooth indentation. I pressed. A section of the stone floor directly in front of the fireplace groaned. My stomach clenched. This was it. The basement level officially doesn't exist. No stairs. A rusted iron ladder, barely visible in the gloom, promised a precarious descent. My hand trembled as I fumbled for the flashlight I'd brought. Its beam cut through the inky blackness, revealing a small, rough-hewn chamber. The walls were not brick or stone, but raw earth, shored up by thick ancient timbers that looked like skeletal ribs. Water dripped somewhere in the unseen depths, a monotonous, maddening rhythm. The air here was heavy, still, yet alive with an unseen presence that raised goosebumps along my arms. The beam of my flashlight swept across the small space. It wasn't a cellar for storage. This was a chamber of purpose. Around it, carved into the earthen walls, were symbols. Not mere decorations, but intricate, disturbing glyphs that seemed to writhe in the flickering light. They pulsed with an ancient, malevolent energy that I could feel pressing in on me. On a rickety wooden shelf, tucked into a shallow alcove, sat a collection of leather-bound journals. Their spines were cracked, their pages yellowed and brittle. The first entry, dated over 2 centuries ago, was written in a spidery, elegant hand. It spoke of the hunger, of the tithe, of the architect of sorrow. As I read, my breath hitched, each word a shard of ice in my chest. Generations. My ancestors had not merely lived in this house, they had cultivated something within it. They had fed it. The journal detailed specific acts, betrayals, and calculated misfortunes, each followed by a cryptic note about the growth or the appeasement. The entity wasn't just drawn to grief and guilt. It was bred by it, nurtured by the very bloodline that birthed me. My eyes scanned the pages, a horrific genealogy of suffering unfolding before me. My hands shook so violently the journal threatened to tear. I saw names, not my own, but familiar family names from the old photo albums. And then a more recent entry written in a hand that was eerily similar to my great-grandfather's. Me, my fire. The words blurred, but the meaning solidified into a terrifying, undeniable truth. I wasn't just a victim, not just an inheritor of a haunted house. I was the chosen sacrifice. My guilt, the very thing that had driven me here, was the final, most potent offering. My family's deaths, the fire that had consumed them, it wasn't an accident of my design. It was the design itself, a trap indeed for me. A low, guttural hum vibrated through the earth beneath my feet. The symbols on the walls seemed to glow with a faint, malevolent light. It knew I was here. It knew I understood. What did it want from me now that I knew the truth? The architect, me, my fire. The words had etched themselves onto the raw, exposed nerves of my mind, not just as a thought, but as a burning brand. I wasn't merely a pawn in this ghastly game. I was the grand prize, the culmination of a long, sickening design. My guilt, the crushing weight I'd carried since the fire, wasn't a burden to be shed. It was the fuel, the ultimate offering. My family. A cold, visceral panic seized me, a suffocating blanket that pressed against my chest. My breath hitched, a ragged sound in the cavernous silence of the house. No, not again. I wouldn't just surrender, not to this thing that fed on sorrow, that twisted grief into a weapon. I had walked into its maw, yes, driven by a desperate need for absolution, but now I understood the trap. And understanding, I realized, was the first step toward defiance. My hands, slick with a sudden, clammy sweat, clenched into fists. If I was the offering, then I would make myself indigestible. I would fight. I needed answers, real answers. I thought of the hidden passages, the strange angles, the unsettling symmetry of this old house. It wasn't just a structure, it was a mechanism. And I, an architect, knew how mechanisms worked. They had weaknesses, they had stress points. My gaze drifted to the floorboards, specifically the section I'd found before, the one that led to the basement level, officially doesn't exist. I had ventured there out of curiosity, a morbid fascination with the house's forgotten secrets. Now it felt like a command. If the truth of my family's legacy, of my legacy, was anywhere, it was in the spaces designed to be forgotten. The air in the house grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence. It was watching me, I knew. Sensing my shift, my newfound resistance. A low hum vibrated through the floor, a sound too deep to be the house settling, too consistent to be a trick of the wind. It was a growl almost, a warning, I moved then not with frantic speed, but with a deliberate, almost ritualistic slowness. Each step on the creaking floorboards was a challenge, a declaration. I knelt, my fingers tracing the familiar seam in the aged wood. The latch, cleverly concealed, yielded with a soft click. A gust of frigid air, smelling of damp earth and something else, something metallic and ancient, like old blood and rust, billowed up from the opening. I descended into the black maw, my flashlight beam cutting a shaky swat through the gloom. The basement level officially doesn't exist was not a simple cellar. It was a labyrinth of rough-hewn rock and mortared brick, a deliberate construction. The floor was packed earth, uneven and gritty. My light found a series of shelves, built into a shallow alcove, not for storage but for display. Dust-caked artifacts lay there, tarnished silver trinkets, brittle leather-bound journals, and crucially rolls of yellowed parchment tied with thin, fraying twine. Blueprints, my breath caught. I pulled one free, its edges crumbling slightly at my touch. Unfurling it carefully, I held it under the flashlight. It was a plan of the ancestral home, but not as it stood now. This was an earlier iteration, or perhaps a schematic of its true purpose. My eyes scanned the familiar layouts, then snagged on something alien. Symbols, not architectural symbols, not standard notations. These were intricate, interlocking designs, inked in a faded, almost rusty pigment. They were drawn onto the very foundation, into the load-bearing walls, even subtly integrated into the floor patterns. It was an abstract shape, like a gaping mouth with sharp, irregular teeth, but also resembling a keyhole or a lock. I flipped through another blueprint, then another. The symbols were everywhere, subtly woven into the very fabric of the house's design. They weren't decorative, they were functional. A sudden, sharp drop in temperature made my skin prickle. My breath plumed in front of me. Heavier. The hum, that low, resonant growl, intensified, vibrating through the packed earth beneath my feet, up my legs, into my bones. Its leather cover was smooth, strangely preserved. Inside the script was an elegant, looping hand. Not a diary, I quickly realized, but a record. It was all here. The words blurred, the implications horrifying. This house wasn't just built on a burial ground or near one. It was the burial ground or a cage or a feeding trough. The flashlight sputtered again, dimming to a sickly yellow glow. It wasn't words, not really, more like the sound of dry leaves skittering across stone, or something vast and heavy dragging itself through dust. The journal slipped from my grasp, landing with a soft thud on the earth. My gaze was fixed on the symbols on the blueprint, then back to the journal, the architect's obligation. Was that me? Was I bound by something I didn't even know existed? And if this house was designed to trap or feed this entity, could it also be unmade? Was there a counter-symbol, a reverse mechanism, hidden within these forgotten plans? My family's dark legacy. The words echoed in the oppressive silence, a cold, dry whisper clinging to the air like dust. It wasn't just built on a burial ground or near one. The flashlight sputtered again, dimming to a sickly yellow glow, threatening to abandon me entirely. My breath hitched, a ragged gasp caught in my throat, tasting of ancient earth and something else, something metallic like old blood or rust or both. The air in this basement level, officially doesn't exist, grew heavier with each beat of my frantic heart. My hand, slick with sweat, gripped the flashlight, its meager beam now barely cutting through the gloom. The walls here were not brick or stone, but a raw, uneven composite, almost organic, like compacted soil mixed with something bony and sharp. My fingers grazed a surface, rough and abrasive, leaving a faint, stinging sensation. I forced myself to move, one hesitant foot after another, the crunch of loose grit under my boots unnaturally loud. What was I hoping to find? More cursed texts? It wasn't words, not exactly, but a suggestion of them, a malevolent hiss that scraped against my mind. Then I saw it. A faint shimmer, not of light, but of distortion in the air ahead. It pulsed, barely perceptible, like heat haze rising from an invisible fire. My feet dragged, each step a monumental effort, but I couldn't stop. I had to know. I had to understand what my ancestors had done, what they had created, what they had trapped. As I drew nearer, the shimmer coalesced, gradually forming a figure. It wasn't solid, not entirely, but it was human-shaped, undeniably. Tall, gaunt, draped in what looked like the tattered remnants of an old uniform, perhaps a caretaker's coat. Its head was bowed, and its limbs seemed to twitch with an unnatural marionette-like jerkiness. Who are you?" My voice was a croak, barely audible over the thumping in my ears. The figure slowly raised its head. "They feed. This was no ally. This was a victim, or worse, a puppet, a pawn." "What do you mean they feed?" I demanded, trying to project strength I didn't feel. My hand trembled, the flashlight beam dancing erratically across the figure's spectral form. The former caretaker's head tilted, a slow, agonizing movement. "Your family, they built it. A cage, a banquet hall for the..." Hungry. The last word was a wet, sickening sound, as if it were trying to swallow something vile. They cultivated it, the grief, the guilt, a harvest, always a harvest. My breath caught, cultivated, not just attracted to, but created. They was my family's fire, my wife, my daughter. They was it all part of this. A deliberate act, orchestrated by something ancient and evil, using my ancestors as its unwitting or perhaps willing architects. The caretaker's form flickered, edges blurring further. You feel it, don't you? The weight, the blame, it's so sweet, so potent, it draws them, the ripest fruit. A wave of nausea washed over me. The guilt, the crushing weight I carried every single day, it wasn't just my burden, it was an offering, a lure. It is woven into the stone, into my blood, it broke me. The ones who feel my pain, it wants to live through my despair. Then it was gone, completely. The flashlight beam, now a sickly ember, flickered one last time, then died. My guilt cultivated, my family's fire a harvest. What did it mean it wanted to live through my despair? Absolute darkness. It wasn't the comfortable kind, the kind that lets your eyes adjust, the kind that might eventually soften into outlines. This was a suffocating ancient black, thick as tar, pressing against my eyeballs, sucking the light from my very thoughts. The flashlight, a useless, dead weight in my hand, felt like a joke. My breath hitched, caught in the frigid air of the basement level, officially doesn't exist. The cold, too, was absolute. I stood frozen, every muscle screaming at me to run, to scramble back up the treacherous steps, to find the sliver of light I'd left behind, but I couldn't. Not now. I had come too far, felt too much, to turn away from the truth I knew waited for me here. My fingers, numb and clumsy, fumbled along the damp, rough-hewn stone wall. The texture was slimy in places, gritty in others, a patchwork of decay. I imagined the unseen stains, the unseen horrors clinging to the surface. The air itself seemed to hum with a low, malevolent frequency, a sound I felt more than heard, resonating deep in my chest. It felt like the house was breathing, a slow, deliberate intake and exhalation of my fear. I had to find another way. There had to be something more. I was certain this wasn't the deepest part, not the true heart of the corruption. My hands moved over every inch of the wall, searching for a seam, a crack, anything that suggested an opening. My mind raced, trying to recall the faint, almost imperceptible shift in the air, the subtle change in the pressure that had hinted at something beyond the previous wall. Then my fingers brushed against it. Not a door, not a lever, but a section of the wall that felt different. I pressed harder, feeling a slight give, a shallow indent. I traced its outline, a perfect rectangle, incongruous with the rough masonry surrounding it. A hidden passage, of course. This house was a labyrinth of secrets, each one designed to lead deeper into its rot. I pushed against the panel with all my weight. It resisted, groaning with a sound like ancient metal tearing. Dust, thick and suffocating, billowed around me, filling my mouth with the taste of earth and something else, something acrid and metallic like old blood and rust. I coughed, hacking but kept pushing. The panel slowly, grudgingly began to slide inward, revealing not a new room but a narrow, vertical shaft. This was it. This was the way down. I found a series of rusty iron rungs embedded in the shaft wall, barely visible even to my touch. They were slick with moisture, and my hands, already trembling, struggled to maintain a grip. I began my descent, one careful, agonizing step after another. The shaft was narrow, pressing against my shoulders. My back, I could feel unseen cobwebs clinging to my face, sending shivers down my spine. As I climbed down, the air grew heavier, denser, like breathing liquid. I built it. I designed the cage. The voices weren't external. They were the projections of my own mind, amplified, twisted by the entity, by this place. I could feel its presence now, thick and cloying, a pressure against my skin, a weight on my chest. It fed on my remorse, on the vivid memory of the fire, the screams of my family, the smoke that choked their final breaths. This place was its stomach, its maw, and I was stepping willingly into its belly. My foot slipped on a rung. My heart leaped into my throat. For a terrifying moment I dangled, scrabbling for purchase, my muscles screaming. I wouldn't fall, I couldn't, I had to face this. Finally, my feet touched solid ground. It wasn't stone, but something softer, yielding yet firm. My hands, still outstretched, found a wall. This wasn't the rough-hewn rock of the basement level, officially doesn't exist anymore. This was smooth, almost polished, but not with human care. It felt organic, like hardened chitin or petrified bone. The air here was still utterly devoid of any breeze, yet the stench of decay was overpowering, mingled with something else, a sweet, cloying aroma that made my stomach churn. I took a shaky step forward, then another. The floor beneath my feet was uneven, a landscape of subtle undulations. My hand, still on the wall, traced strange, intricate patterns not carved, but seeming to be part of the surface like veins or roots. They pulsed faintly, a barely perceptible vibration that thrummed through my fingertips. Then my foot kicked something. I bent down, my fingers exploring the object. It felt like a small, intricate key, but not one I had ever seen. A low, guttural growl vibrated through the floor, a sound that seemed to come from all directions at once, from the very core of the house. It wasn't the entity's voice, not exactly, but a deep, resonant warning, a territorial rumble. The air solidified around me, pressing in, an invisible force trying to crush me. My fingers tightened around the strange key. What did it unlock? The useless, dead weight of the flashlight dropped from my numb fingers, clattering once, then swallowed by the absolute black. It wasn't a soft dark, not the kind that eventually yields faint shapes or the promise of dawn. This was a hungry black, a smothering absence that pressed against my eyes, stealing the very memory of light. I stood in the basement level, officially doesn't exist, a space designed to be forgotten, and now I was trapped within its deliberate oblivion. My breath hitched, a thin, reedy sound in the suffocating quiet. I tasted dust and something else, something metallic and acrid, like old blood mixed with ozone. My skin prickled with a cold that had nothing to do with temperature, a chill that seemed to seep from the very air, worming its way into my bones. My fingers brushed against rough, damp stone, then something slick and yielding that made me recoil with a choked gasp. I didn't want to think about what it might have been. Panic tried to claw its way up my throat, a hysterical scream begging to be unleashed, but I wouldn't. I couldn't. Not here. I was Raj, the architect. I understood structures, understood hidden spaces. I had to think like an architect, even with my heart racing like a trapped bird. I forced myself to move one shuffling foot after another, my hands outstretched like a blind man, tracing the rough texture of the stone wall. They were trying to disorient me, to break my focus. I focused on the blueprints in my mind, the hidden passages, the impossible angles I'd discovered in the house's skeletal remains. This basement level officially doesn't exist wasn't random. It was designed. And if it was designed, it had a purpose. I followed it, inch by agonizing inch, my breath shallow, my muscles tensed. A low, guttural growl rumbled through the floor beneath my feet, vibrating up my legs, shaking my teeth. It wasn't the sound of an animal, it was the sound of the house itself, groaning, shifting, alive. My family's voices, distorted, accusing. Guilty, I let us burn. The words were razor blades tearing at the fragile threads of my resolve. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my palms against my ears, trying to block them out. It was a trick, a manipulation. It fed on guilt, on sorrow. I wouldn't give it what it wanted. I pushed forward, stumbling over something unseen, catching myself before I fell. It hummed faintly, a low, resonant thrum that vibrated through my fingertips, up my arms. This was it. This was the heart of the basement level. Officially doesn't exist. I forced my eyes open, though it made no difference in the black. Lines, angles, symbols I recognized from the oldest, most cryptic of my family's architectural texts. This wasn't just a space, it was a cage or a conduit. It was precisely where, according to the hidden schematics, a central pillar should have stood, a pillar that had been mysteriously absent from all official records. But it wasn't a pillar. I gasped, the realization hitting me with the force of a physical blow. The entity wasn't in the house. It was the house, or rather it was bound to the house, its power flowing through these hidden structures. It was a point of structural vulnerability, a flaw in its prison, or perhaps the very key to its freedom. My ancestor hadn't just built a house, they had built a living trap or an elaborate battery. And the grief of generations, the guilt, the trauma, had been feeding it, strengthening it, allowing it to slowly unravel the very fabric of its architectural cage. I pulled out the small, heavy object I'd brought with me, a relic from my family's past, a small, intricately carved stone amulet I'd found hidden in my grandfather's study. It was meant to seal, to bind. The entity shrieked then, a sound that wasn't sound but pure, agonizing psychic pressure, tearing at my mind, trying to force me back, to paralyze me with fear. The air thickened, pressing in on me, threatening to crush my lungs. I tasted blood in my mouth. My legs buckled, but I held on. I wouldn't let it win, not again, not after everything. It slid into place with a sickening squelch, as if entering living flesh. A searing white light, impossibly bright, exploded from the point of contact, illuminating the basement level, officially doesn't exist for a single horrifying instant. The light pulsed, then faded, leaving behind an afterimage burned onto my retinas. The humming intensified, the growl now a tormented roar, echoing through the hidden depths of the house. The ground shook violently, dust and debris raining down. It was fighting, struggling against the seal. Had it worked? Had I truly sealed it, or had I merely angered it further, awakened something far worse? This was a hungry black, a smothering absence that pressed against my eyes, that crawled into my throat. I couldn't see my hand inches from my face. I couldn't even feel the space around me, only the oppressive weight of the dark itself. The air grew heavy. It wasn't just the absence of light, it was a presence. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the encroaching stillness. Every nerve ending screamed, but I forced myself to stand, to listen. What was I listening for? The scuttling sound? Or something worse, something I couldn't yet imagine? A low thrum vibrated through the stone floor beneath my feet. A sound felt more than heard. It resonated deep in my bones. A slow, building hum that seemed to emanate from the very walls of this place. This basement level officially doesn't exist. I could smell it now, the stench of damp earth, of something ancient and decaying, but also something metallic, like old blood, and something else, cloying and sweet, like wilting flowers left too long in a stagnant room. It was the house's breath, the entity's exhalation. I stumbled back, my foot catching on something unseen. A sharp pain shot up my shin, but I ignored it, scrambling for purchase against the wall. There was nothing, just endless, uneven stone. Then a new sensation, a pressure. Not a touch, not a sound, but a subtle distortion in the air itself, as if the space around me was being squeezed, compressed. It moved closer. I could feel its approach, a tightening sensation in my chest, a sudden, inexplicable urge to fall to my knees and weep. It was feeding, I realized, feeding on my fear, on my guilt. No, not this time. My family's faces flashed in my mind, my wife's smile, my children's laughter, the fire, the smoke, the crushing weight of responsibility. This thing, this presence, wanted to drown me in that. It wanted to consume me whole, but I wouldn't let it, not here, not now. I balled my fists, gripped tight, my resolve solidified, a hard, unyielding knot in my gut. I wouldn't surrender. I wouldn't be another meal. My hand connected with nothing but empty air, but the act itself was defiant. It was a scream without a sound. The air pressure intensified, a sudden, violent push that sent me staggering. I hit the wall hard, my head cracking against the stone. Stars exploded behind my eyes, and a wave of nausea washed over me. I slid down, my legs giving out. But even as I fell, I kicked out, blindly, furiously. It was a sound of pure agony, a sound that grated against my teeth and clawed at my eardrums. It wasn't loud, not in the way a human scream is loud, but it resonated with a primal force that made my very bones vibrate. The entity had recoiled. I had heard it, or at least I had surprised it. The thought was a small, fragile ember of hope in the overwhelming black. Slowly, carefully, I pushed myself up. My head throbbed and a trickle of warm liquid ran down my temple. Blood. I could taste it, metallic and coppery, on my lip, but I was alive. I was still fighting. As my eyes adjusted to the complete lack of light, or perhaps as my other senses sharpened, I noticed something. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor in the floor, different from the earlier thrum. And then a sound. A soft, continuous drip, drip, drip. It wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from the center of the vast, unseen space. A new smell joined the others, ozone, sharp and clean, like the air after a lightning strike, it felt. I took a hesitant step forward, then another, guided by the sound of the dripping. My hand brushed against something rough, then smooth, then rough again. A jagged edge, the wall, but it felt different now, chipped, scarred. The shriek had left its mark. I moved along the wall, my hands trailing over the damaged stone. The air was still thick with the lingering scent of decay and ozone. The dripping grew louder. I moved towards it, my fear replaced by a strange, morbid curiosity. What had I done? What had I struck? My outstretched hand found nothing, no source for the drip, no obvious wound in the stone, yet the sound persisted, drip, and the smell of ozone strengthened, almost overwhelming the other odors. I knelt, my hands sweeping the floor. My fingers brushed against something. Not stone. I picked it up. It was a shard, not of rock. It felt like polished bone, but it was too thin, too delicate. This was a hungry black, a smothering absence that pressed against my eyes, tasted like dust and decay on my tongue, and felt like 1,000 tiny needles pricking my skin. I stood in the basement level, officially doesn't exist, a place built to be forgotten, and now I was part of its secret. A whisper slithered past my ear, cold as grave dirt. It wasn't words, not exactly, but a collage of sound. A child's sob, the crackle of distant flames, the rasp of a dying breath. My breath hitched. My entire body wanted to recoil, to press myself against the unseen wall and vanish, but I couldn't. Not anymore. I had come too far, endured too much to let this thing win now. My legs, though trembling, remained rooted. My hands, still tingling from the dropped flashlight, clenched into fists. The air grew heavy, like breathing underwater. It was waiting for me to break, to feed at the last vestiges of my guilt, the raw, bleeding wound of my family's loss. But the fire, the truth about the faulty design, the architect's negligence, it wasn't my fault alone. My ancestors, their secrets, their greed, their willingness to bury truths in these very foundations, they were part of it too. The weight of that legacy, once crushing, now felt like a shield. I wasn't just Raj, the architect who failed. It was barely audible, but it felt like a roar inside my chest. I imagined it bristling, recoiling from my defiance. I don't get it. It pressed against my eardrums, trying to drive me to my knees. My head throbbed. My eyes burned as if I was staring directly into a scorching sun, even though there was only black. I swayed, my balance tenuous on the uneven floor. I could feel something brushing against my ankle, not a solid object, but a fleeting, icy touch. Like a spectral tendril reaching, probing. I took a shaky step back, then another. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs, but it wasn't just fear now. It was a desperate, burning resolve. This wasn't just some vague evil. It was the accumulated rot of generations, nurtured by the house, waiting for the perfect host. And I, unknowingly, had designed the perfect vessel for its final blossoming. The house wasn't just a structure. It was a mausoleum of their moral decay, and this entity was its hungry ghost. Could it ever truly be expelled, or merely starved into dormancy? I moved along the wall, one hand outstretched, the other held defensively in front of my face. Each step was a gamble, a silent prayer that the floor wouldn't give way, that I wouldn't trip over some unseen obstacle. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and something else, something metallic and sweet like old blood. My fingers brushed against something wooden. A door. I pushed and it groaned, scraping against the stone floor. A sliver of pale, greenish light bled into the absolute black. Not much, but enough to distinguish shapes, to see the faint outlines of stairs leading up. Hope, sharp and sudden, lanced through me. I didn't hesitate. I stumbled through the opening, my eyes straining to adjust. The basement level officially doesn't exist seemed to sigh behind me, a long, drawn-out exhalation. I didn't look back, I just climbed. When I finally emerged, blinking into the familiar, if still unsettling, gloom of the main house, I felt a profound exhaustion settle deep in my bones. My clothes were damp, my hair matted with sweat, my throat was raw, but I was out. I was breathing the relatively cleaner air of the upper levels, away from the suffocating presence below. I walked through the silent rooms, past the dusty furniture draped in white sheets, past the portraits of my stern-faced ancestors whose choices had led me here. They looked down with the same unreadable expressions, but now I saw them differently. The morning sun, weak and watery, eventually filtered through the grimy windows of the living room. I sat on a covered armchair, watching the dust motes dance in the feeble light. The house was quiet, a different kind of quiet now. I had faced it. I had walked away. But what did that mean for the house, for me? The weight of ownership, once a burden, now felt like a responsibility. I couldn't just sell it, not knowing what lay beneath. I couldn't abandon it, leaving it to claim another unsuspecting soul. The house was a wound, festering for generations, and I was the one who had finally lanced it. But how do I truly heal something so old, so deeply corrupted?